there's also Anchal. I think she is about to join, or maybe she's already here. She is a designer from NIFT Kangra. So yeah, because you might see them in my picture, so I thought it's better to have them live. And also it's good to interact with SEP students, because I told them SEP students are really intelligent and maybe better than SPA students. So that's why I've got my team also here. And I'm not really a morning person, as you can see from my face. So it's really nice to have a bit of interaction if possible, or just, use your thumbs up signs. I think it always sort of livens up this really sort of dead interface that we have now because of COVID, all the digital sort of classes and meetings. So great. So should I share my screen, Kriti?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, because I have a few sort of slides just to discuss possible processes of what I'm calling participatory design, which also I see that you guys are trying to do. So I'm going to talk about our latest sort of projects, because I'm tired of speaking about our older ones again and again. And also then you might have seen this on social media. So maybe it's a bit better to get, the sort of backside story. So what are the different sort of factors that make participatory design? What are the different sort of aspects? What are the different sort of features? So prototype, people, project, process, and policy. So you can see I really like alliterations. It's a disease really, and I will try not to do this more often in the presentation, but generally it also helps you sort of structure your thought. So I want to just play a very short word association game. So when we say prototype, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, in terms of just think about like the first word that pops up in your mind. Anyone?
Idea, maybe.
Idea. Okay, good. We are getting somewhere. More words. Just the first thing. Anything silly is also fine.
A 3D model.
3D model. Okay. Because of COVID, especially now, everything's digital. What else?
Someone says trial version.
Okay. Yes. Trial version. Correct. Yeah. Can we have 2-3 more at least? You can keep your video off if you want, though it's nice to see, young, bright faces in the morning. Prototype, that's what you guys are doing, right? In your studio. So, I mean, I know it's a bit obvious, but sometimes, you come up with things which are not so obvious, which is the whole point of prototyping.
Assumptions.
Assumptions. Did you say assumptions?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good one. You're testing your sort of assumptions. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to make this a bit easier, but I do have more sort of word associations coming up. So please do have your coffee. But for me, really, it just boils down to make more mistakes. I mean, only one word would be mistakes, because, if you haven't made mistakes, if in prototype you realize that whatever you set out with is exactly, perfect for what you had in mind, then you haven't really learned anything. So I think that's a very unideal situation. So prototyping is actually making lots of mistakes and then, iterating to get somewhere, which is very different, much ahead from where you started. So I think architects like doing this, making models. So that's something which is very obvious, starting from very small, simple wireframe models to, bigger models. And then of course, for your thesis, I'm sure there's some really, really cool things that you guys have been doing. And then of course, building, on site in terms of 1:1, like a life-size prototype. That's really the best way to get any sort of feedback, because why we are prototyping is not just to see like, how a design can be developed, but also to get user feedback. But what do you do when you're stuck because of COVID? So this is what my office has been facing for the last 6 months. And I think everyone, not just my office, all offices, students, teachers. So basically, after the initial sort of anxiety and setback, what we all decided is that, okay, let's make the best of whatever we have. And this was when stationery shops were also closed in the city, right? So what are the resources that we have in our own house? Let's sort of, just like use whatever and make something. And so when we realized we really like building with our own hands, so very DIY sort of processes, but when you can't build because you don't have materials and you can't be on site, then what you do is maybe you build manuals for building. So you kind of make building manuals. So that's what we started out with. And then even to make a building manual, you can prototype. So Anchal had made these really little sort of, prototypes, just little bits of paper that she had. And I really liked that, so I put it here. And then finally, these are the sort of manuals that came up, which are digital online as well, but of course, they can be printed and handed out. And we hope to do more of that, once we can be back in our studio. And so this is really, just to give you ideas of just pick up anything that's available, whatever is like lying, unused, or even if it is, being used, it can be sort of repurposed. So this is the one on the right is a stencil that Nishta had made, because recently we were, I'm going to come to that project. So we were coming up with some design strategies for weekly markets to observe social distancing. And the idea was to come up with some sort of signs, which can be just spray painted. So she picked up whatever cardboard, whatever cartons that she found lying around, and then sort of cut out these things. Newspapers, they're my favorite sort of resource. So this is the project, and this is something that we have been doing as a part of something called Maybe Delhi campaign. And it's one of the first time that civil society organizations have mobilized themselves to give feedback to the ongoing master planning process. So a master plan is made in our cities every 20 years. In Delhi, the last one was 2021, which was made 20 years back. So next year it sort of expires, and then there needs to be a new one, a 2041 master plan. So for which the work has begun. And usually master planning, I also don't like the word, because who's the master? Who's planning for us, and why is he a man? So usually the master planning process is supposed to take, sort of user feedback, so stakeholder engagement, but these just become chittis, just letters you're supposed to write and no one really opens. So this time NIUA, who's actually in charge of formulating the master plan on behalf of Delhi Development Authority, they are trying to reach out to people. And we have also mobilized ourselves that, hey, you don't have to work too hard to reach out to us. Here we are with our sort of inputs and feedback. So as part of that campaign, to which like some 30, 40 organizations are associated, we also thought to do a few demonstration projects. And this is something for the vendors, for the street vendors in the city who have been out of business for the last few months because of COVID. So, the Delhi government has been looking at sort of trial runs of opening weekly markets. And weekly markets are your hafta markets, Mangal Bazaar. They open on sometimes Sundays, like the Sunday Daryaganj book market, and of course the Tuesday markets, Friday markets. And this is a sort of our, tradition. This is a part of the heritage of our, from our villages to now our cities. And so here as designers, how can we help? How can we sort of support people is what we were thinking about. And the idea was to come up with some social distancing strategies. I'm using social distancing because that's the most common word. Let's say physical distancing. So how can we observe the sort of, COVID responsive norms for the safety of the customers and the vendors? And how can vendors sort of like, go about setting this up for themselves? And also how can this be used sort of, across Indian cities? So for that, we also studied how markets are opening across the world in the global south. So we were looking at Indonesia, we were looking at Ghana, we were looking at Myanmar. So that's sort of a background to what we were doing. And then these are some very simple strategies we came up with. And I think when you work in the field of what I'm calling, socially conscious design or participatory design, then you realize that, any sort of design interventions, so-called interventions are very, very subtle. They have to be very, very simple, very, they need to feel very natural. It cannot be something alien which comes from outside, because it won't work for people. And that's the best thing about, working with people, that you immediately, good design is something that works. And if it's not a good design, it's not someone who will tell you it's good or not. It basically just will not work. So I won't go into details of exactly what were the different strategies, because I'm really interested in talking about the process. And so this is for another market near the Civic Center. And so there are these women supported by Seva who set up their goods, which are, sort of repurposed secondhand clothes. And they kind of put it along the pavement. And then the customers sort of line up on the roads because it's a Sunday and there's not a lot of traffic. So these are the sort of visuals you're seeing. So we started sort of prototyping for a pilot. So a pilot was like a trial run, like some of you had said. And so the idea was, let's see what are the different sort of solutions that can come in to support the vendors. And also not just for a COVID response, but also can we help improve the vending experience on a general basis. So when Nishta had gone to the field, a very common sort of feedback, because the first idea is always needs mapping, right? You understand what are people's needs before you start sort of like thinking of solutions for them, with them. And so one of the needs that came up was shelter from the sun and shelter from rain. And so this is not really related to, making it COVID proof, but the idea is, if you are sort of, being involved in a project, what else can you help make better? So these are two sort of designs that we were looking at. The one on the left is basically a foot operated, like a foot pedal sort of, DIY sanitation station. And this is an open source design. We did not come up with it. This is a design which has been floating around in the world. And I often wonder, like, if it's one woman who came up with it, and then it kind of, got floated around, if it's like a lot of women or men who came up with it at the same time. But the best thing about open source design is, you put it out there and someone sort of develops it further and then kind of passes it on. And that's what also we like to do. All of our designs are sort of open source, put up on our website. And the idea is that it sort of travels further. So behind this, so let me first talk about, I think, the canopy. So the idea behind the canopy was that, typically you see bamboo is used for canopies, right? Because it's the most sort of affordable, also sustainable. But in this case, the women are traveling from Northeast Delhi, so it's quite far. They're traveling by auto. They need to carry like this whole portly of clothes. And it's not really possible to carry bamboo, which would be also pretty long because you need, that sort of a length and that sort of a span. And there is no place to store this bamboo, at least as far as we know. So then what we were thinking is, can we use PVC pipes, within the sort of budget that people are willing to spend themselves, or maybe with some sort of support. And the idea is that it's collapsible. The idea is that, you can sort of like, quickly just take it out and, carry it with you. So if it's like 1 meter, 3 feet, or let's say even 4 feet long, then you can kind of carry it in the auto. So these were the sort of things that we were thinking about. And then, so this person, I think Nishta was interacting with her, so she would know better, and you can ask her in the question answer round. So she put her own sort of, plastic sheet that she had, and she gave us a lot of feedback. So I just want to show you like behind the scenes what was happening. So this is Nishta's work, like late at night, because that's what you have to do sometimes when you're interning. But behind this sort of, these last 3 images are also all these, flop shows. So, we tried lighter PVC, we tried different structures, didn't work, they were flimsy, and that's exactly why we had to test them. So I just wanted to show you that, because please make lots of mistakes, make lots of structures which don't work. You're working on a lari, you're working on, some kit, I think. And so at least structurally, things have to be tried. And even in terms of kit, you make many versions and, you get sort of feedback from people without irritating them. Because, sometimes if you go again and again without any sort of development, even people get irritated. Why are you taking my time? So from that, let's also look at the sanitation station a bit, because I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. And the idea is to keep it low cost. So this is within 1,000 rupees. And you can see how it works. It's very simple. So basically no springs attached. Yeah, you just sort of pulling that structure down. And what are you really using? What's the spring? The spring is just the sort of the nozzle of the sanitizer. That's the thing which has been pushed down. So just to give you an idea what we recently did, this is just like 2 weeks old. And I think Nishta did this in a day or 2 days, something like that. And it was a lot of fun. And also, I wanted to show you this from the same project, because the idea was we were sort of testing these distances. They sound very obvious to architects because, testing like, okay, how far is 4 feet? How far is the distance between vendors? How many vendors would be spaced out in this stretch is really very obvious, but it is not really to people who don't really like think in plans, and it, comes across as very technical. So here what they're doing is a role playing. And I think that's also really, I think it's a very nice sort of a prototype strategy. Prototype doesn't need to be only a physical sort of prototype, right? So when you're also like role playing, you're kind of just understanding what the Grahak Vikreta sort of relationship is and the distances. And that's what the vendors here who are taking photos of Saleha from another team and of Nishta are sort of just capturing this process. And they're also very smart because, they immediately sent it to the MCD for approval. So it's also good to document your prototyping. And on the right is basically the stencil that Nishta had made, and it came out really nicely. Okay, so the second thing, I think this sort of word association will be very simple. But what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of people? So I'm looking for a few quick responses here, just to make sure you're still awake. Thanks for keeping your videos on. Okay, why are we engaging with people? What is the whole point? I already mentioned some of these words. Oh, okay, chat. Fine, let's do that. Yeah, I like that. Okay, it's a student, right? It's not a teacher. Yes, of course, engagement. What else? Who are these people? Apart from the fact that this is your studio brief, why are we really engaging with them? Vidhi, you look like you want to say something. Sorry, your video is on top of my list, so I'm picking on you.
So I wanted to ask, like, what do you mean by saying why are we interacting with the people? I mean, isn't that our job? Isn't that what we're supposed to do for them?
And why are you
I
supposed to
mean,
do?
like, because I mean, someone has to design something. We cannot. I mean, we have to keep evolving, right? So we need to interact also to sort of evolve. You cannot just go on with the ideas of the older times and expect it to work here also. So maybe that's why we engage with the people, and that's
Yeah. So really, thanks really, because the idea is I'm just making my job easier, and these things sound very obvious, but even sorry, I think you're a bit stuck. Okay, but I'm going to go on. But even if these things are obvious, you'd be surprised how many architects don't really do that, how much we just work in our own studio, how much time we spend on, I mean, now because of COVID, we don't have an option. But otherwise, how much time we spend on online sort of, documentation of our work, online sort of presence of our work, but not really offline on ground. And I think those are just the kind of things I wanted to put out there. Also, yeah, the answer is very obvious. I just wanted you guys to sort of wake up a bit or hear from you. But yeah, the people are the users, and I'm going to just minimize this. Vidhi, I think your connection went off. Yes, exactly. To bring out a sensitive approach. And also, I mean, it's very simple. I'll tell you, if you're involving people in your design process, then what happens is that your implementation becomes super easy, but more than implementation, it is the long-term sort of life of whatever you've done, right? Because when you're making them stakeholders in the design development, they start taking ownership of it, right? It's not something which has come because you've given something to people, right? Especially when you're working in the development sector, which is what you guys are doing. You're working with people that's considered the sort of development sector. So the idea is that if you just come up with something which is really cool, so look at why our policies sort of don't work. I mean, look at Swachh Bharat mission, for instance. There are all these toilets which are being built across villages. Many of these toilets are not being built, not being used, simply because maybe there's no water. Maybe it wasn't really made clear about how people really use these spaces, what really their needs are. Sometimes people need a larger sort of a size, they need a more sort of an open sort of an environment. And so at the end of the day, these things just don't work, these solutions don't work. But if you're sort of taking people along, then what happens is it's not just your solution, it becomes like a shared sort of a solution. And after you leave, because you will leave, you don't live there, the sort of what we call O&M, operation and maintenance, very boring sort of a phrase, but used a lot in public projects, that that sort of headache is gone, because people take the sort of ownership of the operation and the maintenance of the project. So it's also very smart to be sort of working with people, and people are your users. Oops. Okay. So yeah, so basically, if you take something physical instead of drawings, if you take models, I think that's very helpful. In your case right now, everything is digital, everything is online, so I understand that it has to be done through a digital interface. So yeah, I think COVID has made things easier for a certain approach, but don't forget about the physical approach once you're able to be back on the field. And here is the lady from the weekly market that I was telling you about, and she's giving Nishta some valuable feedback. Oops, 1 second. Okay.
Swati, can you increase the volume or something? We couldn't hear what she was saying.
Yeah, I did increase it. Okay, I'm going to play it once more, otherwise I'll just translate what she said. I mean, I'll repeat what she said. Yeah, so basically what she's saying is it needs to be bigger. You can understand, but I really like the way she's sort of like, talking about like using her hands exactly the sort of size that she wants, because I think the size that we had gone with was perhaps for a different place, or the moment you sort of, start tying things, and then the angle changes and the span also changes. Also, it was quite expensive, so if you have a larger structure, then you can't do this within 1,000 rupees, which is how much everyone might be willing to spend. So there are these sort of trade-offs. And I also come to the need for such a structure, if there's a need for this at all. But this is also an example to say that sometimes you'll have people who are quite like vocal, who are willing to give you feedback. So, they will tell you exactly what's on their mind, but it's not always very easy. Because first of all, when you're doing something nice for people, when they don't expect anyone like you coming and spending time to kind of figure out a solution with them, then anything you do is fine, right? You ask them how is this, they're like, wow, bahut badhiya, bahut acha hai. But you're not really getting real feedback, right? कि इसको कैसे बेहतर बना सकते हैं, because they really appreciate कि students काम कर रहे हैं. So, we think of, there are a lot of approaches to this. My mentor, when I was your age, Marco, so he used to tell me that, Swati, ask every question thrice. It's a rule of 3, because, the first time you ask a question, ye kaisa hai, ye aap ke liye kaam kar raha hai, they'll be like, हाँ, बहुत अच्छा है. And the second time you ask them, they're like, हाँ, बोला, अच्छा है, थोड़ा सा इसमें और भी कुछ कर सकते हैं. And third time they're like, अच्छा है, लेकिन इसमें ऐसा कर सकते हैं. So sometimes you're also giving that person space and also sort of trust that actually I'm really interested in listening to you. And then also sometimes I think it's good to also think about some yes and no questions. Of course, feedback is good if it's qualitative, but sometimes if you really think about what I want to understand, what do I want to ask, before you go. So this is a picture from Amravati in Andhra Pradesh, where we are working on the sort of upgradation of government schools, just like Delhi was also doing. And so there, the architects, were asking students what are the things that they like, and what is something they'd like to change. And so they use these green and red sort of cards. Also, when we work with children, there's so many really creative things that you can use, like stickers, these smiley stickers, sort of heart stickers. So if you have a few options, people can just go and vote. So I think voting is a very important sort of approach, and there are so many other approaches. And definitely, I think something that you can when we are there's no post-COVID anymore, but let's say when we are further down this COVID world, then maybe we can start interacting with each other. So it's very important to take these sort of physical objects, especially when you're interacting with kids. And there are many other different sort of mediums, but I'm not going to get into that because they're a bit more open-ended. For instance, like mental mapping, drawing together, these sort of things. But I think the word I'm going to pick from what I just said is open-ended. I think the idea is always to keep your designs a bit open-ended. Don't finish. I know it's a bit difficult because that's what we're trained as students also to do. But when you're working with people, and also when you're designing a mainstream architectural project, they're also people when you have a client. But when I say working for people, I really mean more, sort of like, a larger group, or working, with communities in the development sector. It's always also very important to keep your design process open-ended, because you don't want to go with something finished and then say, do you like it or do you not like it? The idea is that you are open to feedback, and then you're going to sort of develop it further, or maybe you just go back from the start. So always please go with sort of open-ended concepts if possible. And it's also possible to get sort of ranking, on different things, that, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, or, like Ola and Uber do, right? So how do you rate the driver? So, or like a sad smiley, indifferent smiley, and happy smiley. So, these are sort of different things that you can think about. Yeah, and I think there were 1 or 2 other points which might just come up when we are talking later on. So great. So moving on to now the third sort of word association. So please don't kill me, but this is really an important one. So when you think of a project, what comes to your mind? Is this a project that you guys are working on? What's the first sort of step for a project? Please give me answers. Do you see what you're working on as a project? Scale. That's yeah. I think that's a good one. That's something I want to discuss later. Definitely. What are you calling?
Analysis.
Analysis. Okay. And what are you calling what you're doing? Is it how are you thinking of it as a project, as an intervention? What are you thinking about? Purpose, which means, let's say, objective, right? What's the intention of your project? What's the objective? Good. That's how you start. Why am I doing what am I doing? What I'm doing. So you start with needs mapping, right? You start understanding what are the different sort of needs. And so out of that, what emerges before you start designing? What's that thing that you need? And for whom? Yeah, exactly. Who are your stakeholders? And I think you might have done stakeholder mapping. I saw your work, I think it's very well sort of thought of. So I'm guessing you've done your stakeholder mapping. Okay, baseline is basically what's the existing data, and then how you're going to sort of measure how it sort of changes, or what is the existing situation you're going to talk about, how it changes. Input and output. Okay, but tell me, even before you start any design sort of project, what's the first thing that you need before you start designing? What's that one thing? Case study. Okay, good. Okay, you guys are very good with your documentation. I can see that. But to design, what do you need? A question, right? What is that called in architectural vocabulary? Come on, guys, girls, more. Okay, सबने अपना video off कर लिया. Okay, so I think the word I was looking for. Okay, Ramya, you want to say something? No. Okay. Oh, you're a teacher, so I can't really ask you. Okay, so the word I was looking for is oh yes, Bhavna, thank you. Design question, Roham, design question. Yes, and basically what it becomes is a design brief, right? There is a design brief that your teachers give you in architectural studios. Typically, they give you what is the area, what are different activities, what are different functions, kitne logo ke liye hai, maybe. And then, if you have a more informed teacher, maybe they give you a few more sort of qualitative, questions or answers, saying ki kaun log use karenge, kab use karenge, what are the different sort of, social aspects of that, economic aspects of that. So a design brief is a very important thing, right, before you start designing. But when it comes to designing, in the sort of context that you're working in, I think it's also important to come up with your own design brief. Or if you've been given a design brief, to sort of like question it and then go back to it. So I feel that the design brief is also an important part of designing. So I'm just going to minimize the chat. But I'm going to come back to the question of scale. One of you had written scale. I think that's a good one. So just going back to this recent example that I was talking about, like the need for a canopy. Why is there a need for a canopy? Now, this is something which had come in because, the vendors told Nishtha that actually this is something that we want, right? But we also have to question, is it something that they really want? Can it be solved through any other way? And, how many of them want it? So, some of them are already putting up a canopy, right? Like you can see in this picture. So why are the others not putting up a canopy? What are the sort of reasons which are barriers for people to put up a canopy? And also when you look at, existing solutions, I think like the most sort of elegant solutions are the ones which have already been done by people, right? Because they have prototyped a lot. These are tried and tested sort of solutions after many iterations, and they get scaled. Why do they get scaled? Because they work. It's as simple as that. So let's look at this video, which I really like. So you see, there's a manhole cover. And so one of the, the strings for the canopy, one of the ropes is tied to the manhole cover, like the hole in the manhole cover. And then of course, the other two are tied using stone. So basically what is happening here is, the person has found whatever resources she had available to kind of create this canopy for herself. So what are the reasons that other people are not creating this sort of a canopy? So maybe it's the sort of, like she has access to a few things. I mean, though I have to say she's quite brilliant. I mean, it seems like she has access to nothing, but she has put up, propped up the bamboo, put those stones, which is very common, but then the manhole cover is something not many people would have thought about. I think she's a very good designer. And the other sort of, designers there, The vendors would design things for themselves. So they'd use whatever little props, like street props are available. So if there's a billboard, if there's some sort of a shade, they've also tied these cables, ropes, and also like, electric cables to hang the clothes for display. And this is really nice, it's just the grooves, the mortar between the, the stone masonry, and that has, because it's protruding out a bit, that's enough to kind of hang these clothes. And then of course this lady has access to a light pole, and that's why, she's been able to tie it at the front. So what is happening is some people have access to a few things, and some people have really like been very creative about it, and some people have taken the initiative, and some people haven't taken the initiative. And so at the end of the day, what we realized is, and we're still like working on it, and that's why I wanted to not show you like a tried and tested project, but the idea was to discuss our work in progress. We are actually discussing it tomorrow in a sort of a discussion with all the NGOs involved. But can we sort of help facilitate this process, right? So can we come up with, let's say, some sort of a base, some sort of a starting point to which people can add themselves, to which people can adapt themselves. So that's what we are thinking, and let's see how it goes. And so coming to a fourth P, process. So I think this is the most important part of participatory design, and I'm really sure Kriti would have covered this in detail. So I only have one slide on this. I also saw, your work. So the two students' work that Kriti had shared on the transit shelter. And so in that, the processes were very well explained, the level 1, level 2, like what are the processes of resettlement, and what are the things to think about. So I thought it was very well captured. So I haven't put a lot of slides here, and just this sort of slide that we created based on all the projects we have done over the past few years, in which I'll just quickly go through it. So usually our work begins when someone gets in touch with us, a social worker or a resident from an informal settlement, because that's where we primarily work. So here the lady's talking about there's been a fire, sometimes there's been a sort of a demolition, and that's where we go in to help people rebuild. So then we have a discussion with the community partner on ground. So it's always important for us to work with people who've already been working there for many, many years. So an NGO, or maybe we talk directly to a community leader. And so then the first sort of step is a community meeting. It's really important to get everyone together who's involved and then listen to everyone. And these are really like very interesting sort of meetings, I have to tell you. And then, the idea is that we all come up with a solution that works for everyone. It's not always possible in one meeting. There are a series of sort of discussions that you need to have. Sometimes you need to split into smaller groups, what we call focus group discussions. And so then when you come up with a solution, which we've shown as one step, but it's many, many, many steps, then you kind of start thinking about the design. So, you sort of come up with a design brief in this step, and then you start thinking about the sort of design iterations. And then you go back and forth, right? It's very important to engage with the same stakeholders over and over and over, and have a long-term sort of an engagement, as long as possible. And through these sort of design discussions, through models, communication, in air, on ground, these sort of things, you come up with a final design. And meanwhile, you're also creating partnerships, to help to get support on your project, maybe also for funding. The final design is selected, and a building team is also sort of identified. People who've taken the initiative to do it, because most of the projects that we work on are collective. Like, it's a collective ownership of projects. So many people step forward to volunteer for it. We also volunteer for most of our projects. And then finally, you drop an action plan. Okay, so how am I going to negotiate with the different authorities? How am I going to negotiate with DDA? How am I going to negotiate with MCD? How am I going to negotiate with the police? And so I'm not going to go into those details, but you can imagine these things are quite tricky. And then the construction starts, which is always incremental, because, especially in communities which are more precarious, we don't immediately put up something because that can make them more vulnerable, because often they are at a threat of eviction. So all this idea is to go, incrementally, so step by step. And then through the process of construction, there's also a team of builders which emerges, right? Because they have been trained through the process of construction. And a construction always is a sort of hybrid of building technologies that people are already using, and then the sort of maybe newer building technologies that we get in as sort of technically, trained people, which architects and planners and engineers are. And so through this sort of confluence of different skills, now if there's a team of builders, they can build these sort of spaces elsewhere, or maybe train other sort of builders. And then the idea is that this continued engagement, which need not just be, for gathering feedback, but it could be through other sort of interventions, or maybe not even interventions, maybe, collaborations with other sort of people that we have connected on ground with the people that we work with. So, this sort of relationship can take different forms. In your studio, right now, I understand it's one semester, but some of you might continue to be in touch with the people that you are interacting with right now. I know that Kriti has already been in touch with them over the last few semesters, so that's already a sort of long-term engagement. And this is something I say often, that when you're working with people, with different communities, your projects really stop being projects and they become relationships. You will realize, and then also you'll see you won't be able to do a lot of projects, because architects typically, if they do like 10-20 projects in a year or 6 months, if you're working in this, I think, this domain, you will see that you're actually working much slower, and definitely less sort of less number of so-called projects, but it's a much deeper and satisfying relationship is what I think. And so finally, the last sort of P, for me, it's really important, which is policy. So always look at the bigger picture. I understand that you're architecture students, so this is something that perhaps you haven't started thinking about, but maybe through this, through this course, you start thinking about it. And here, I think the idea of scale is also very important to think about. And often, I think there are two approaches here. So what happens is, many times it becomes product design. So for instance, if you're thinking of something and you realize that, okay, I can think of it as a product, and if I scale it up, like social enterprises do this often, right? Okay, what is my scale up strategy? Yeah. And when you're applying for a grant, this is a very common language. How can I help build 1,000 more such sort of, spaces or such sort of products? I think that's one approach. That's a social enterprise, entrepreneurial sort of approach, which I've tried, and it doesn't really something which makes me happy. It doesn't really work for me, and I've realized. And all of you have to choose your own sort of approach, but you have to realize that. So what works for you, and what I've seen is at a policy level, if I'm able to understand, the spaces that we're creating architecturally, how do they kind of link to the policies which are available at the sort of a larger level? I think that would be really helpful for long-term, large-scale sort of impact. So I think I'll just give you one or two examples. Also, I think thinking about project brief. Also, what I wanted to say is that, right now you've been given a brief, for the studio, because you have a very limited time. And I'm sorry about the noise in the background. There's construction going on in my neighbor's house. But at the end of the day, do think about, how that brief works for the situation, right? So maybe in the beginning, you have identified certain needs. And now when you are gathering user feedback, you try to evaluate that, have I met those needs which I had identified? But the more you talk to people, you might realize that there are, some needs which you hadn't really thought about. And, maybe the priority of needs could be changed a bit. And then also, if you have a certain outcome or output in mind, maybe the form can change, right? Not within your semester, because I want you guys to do well. But I'm just saying, in like real life, when you actually take these lessons on ground and you maybe start designing a school like we have done, and you realize that maybe I don't really need to design a school. I need to perhaps just think about, hiring better teachers, or sort of maybe the syllabus needs a bit of a revision. And I think that's the sort of flexibility as designers that we need in the social realm, which is sort of maybe unlearning a few things that we've learned as architects. So this is a design of an Anganwadi that we were going to build for children of farmers along Yamuna, who are at the threat of eviction because the riverfront development plan sort of visualizes these biodiversity parks and recreational zones. So they're going to build parks by removing people and removing farmlands. And also there was a recent eviction by DDA to create compensatory plantation. I mean, that kind of thing is so absurd. I want to share it with you, which is that, if you've cut trees because of a development project somewhere, then you have to kind of plant them elsewhere, in the state. And so they're planting trees along the Yamuna as compensatory plantation for something they've cut down elsewhere by removing these farmlands. So it's the most absurd of situations. Anyway, so because farmers don't have land tenure, they're going to be removed from here. But while they're here, they are, their children are here, they need education and they need nutrition. And Anganwadis are the sort of spaces that provide this to younger children till the age of 6. And so we have found that a very effective sort of a way of sort of like, superimposing, let's say, what is considered illegal or illegitimate, sort of informal processes of building and existing with sort of formal processes of at a policy level. So the Anganwadi basically is provided midday meals, it's provided like staff through the ICDS scheme, which is the Integrated Child Development Scheme. And so that is something we can leverage from the government, because they don't really see, if the settlement is legal or illegal. They basically see if there are more than 800 households with children, then an Anganwadi can be set up there. So how can we create an informal space for availing the sort of formal sort of a scheme? So that's what we have been looking at. And then finally, I think to conclude, and also like my voice is very tired. So this is very, I think, connected to the work that you guys are doing. So I know that you guys are thinking about a sort of a kit when people are resettled, relocated elsewhere. And I think you've kind of designed a transit shelter as well. So I think it's also important to understand what does this process look like. So at a policy level, it's also important to understand what are the different sort of rehabilitation policies which exist. Now in Delhi, we have a policy by DUSIP from 2015. There was a recent court order, Ajay Mapin, case from 2019. And so these are the things that one needs to understand if you're working with people who are going to be resettled or, who are in the process of being rehabilitated. And maybe again, not possible within the studio time. It is possible, great, maybe you've already seen it, but definitely keep this in mind. So this is something a bunch of us drew up. The project is called Missing Basti, because the idea was to sort of map all the bastis which are going missing in the city over the last few decades. And also to bring information to people. And this is what designers are really good at, right? Designers are very good at facilitating. Designers are very good at creating and also communication. So many times people don't know, what their rights are, unke kya hak hai, unke kya adhikar. And sometimes we just tell them that, hey, you are being evicted illegally. This is what you can do. You can go to the court with this. I think you're really helping a lot. And this is the sort of information that a few of us try to put out there. So I'll just show you some of the steps. So step one is that, you have the right to receive a notice about eviction. You can't be removed without an eviction notice, which should come at least a month in advance, but usually it doesn't happen. And most of the evictions, at least in Delhi, are illegal. You might have heard of the recent court order to remove all the juggies from railway land, which has created a lot of panic with the people that we work with. And then the second one is that you have the right to receive rehabilitation in appropriate housing, for which a survey should have been done before you remove people. Everyone should have been sort of marked. Okay, so, 100 people live here in this house. There's so many people who live, those sort of things. And then a plan should have already been drawn up together with the people. So when you're going to be resettled, there should already be housing for you where you're going to be resettled, and that housing should have been developed in consultation with you. And now I know it sounds very, very ideal. I know it sounds like, well, this is not India, but these are the processes that need to happen. Sometimes they happen, 99% of the times they do not happen. And then after all of this is done, only then you can actually be transported. And I think to draw a bus there is really funny because people are never transported. Bulldozers just arrive. They just kind of drive over the houses, their crops. And then you cannot evict people, when board exams are happening, during, children's examinations, during extreme weather conditions, and there should be provision for health facilities, except that none of these are ever met when evictions happen, at least from what I've seen in Delhi. They're always during exams, always extreme weather conditions because the vulnerability is sort of used by the authorities. And then where you're going to be resettled, there should be a ration shop, there should be a health facility, there should be sanitation facilities, and there should be drinking water, which also almost never happens. But I think these are the sort of things to keep in mind. And I also wanted to share this with you because, it's also very important to think of it as a very, to humanify the sort of experience, right? Because it's deeply traumatic for families to be uprooted from somewhere and then, removed from there and moved elsewhere. And if it is done in this way, it can be really like easy for people, and it doesn't happen in this way. So how can we sort of also think about making this process possible for people? Of course, as designers, we also have certain limitations, but always good to keep this in mind. And I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to share with you. And I'm looking forward to a lot of questions now. Please try to apply all the P's that I've talked about to your own sort of, thought processes. And I look forward to, what develops based on the sort of user feedback that you are all going to get now.
Thank you so much, Swati. I think that was extremely insightful and, very. And I'm just really happy that you put together your presentation that sort of weaves into what we're doing even in the studio, which means I'm hoping now there are more questions or at least more concerns that come up in the minds of the students. So I'll open the platform for questions now. Um, it's up to you guys. Anybody wants to go first?
Thanks, Ramya.
I have a question. You briefly mentioned the building manual in the starting, and we are kind of going on to that phase right now. Can you just like maybe elaborate on how you go about it and everything, and what details do you put in there, and everything else?
Right. And so you're doing the building manual for which project, if I can understand?
For the Sayog Lari project.
Okay, okay. Great. So are you also, I think I understand the process a bit, but I would also like to understand it a bit more. So you guys are now going to take some user feedback, right? Online from people. Designs?
That's going to happen in after a month. So before that, they're making these manuals where they're going to explain the process of construction and how do you put together.
How can you build it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the first thing is to observe, how people are already building, which I think now is very difficult. I also tell my team that, once you start building something badly, others come and show you how to build it better. And, that's the best sort of way to learn. But now, of course, these things are not possible. Also, who are the people who you're building for? What are the various sources of information that they usually use, when they want to get information. So, for instance, we have been working with building manuals for some time, but now we're beginning to realize that maybe YouTube videos are the best sort of building manuals, right? So, even when we were making, Nishta was making this sanitation kiosk, we saw a lot of online videos, and that was so easy to understand. And we're like, we need to catch up. What are we doing? We're making these, old world like building manuals. Who even reads building manuals anymore? So maybe that's something you want to think about. Ask the people, how do you usually access information? अगर कुछ सीखना है, खाना बनाना सीखना है, तो रेसिपी देखते हो या फिर मतलब यूट्यूब पे आप किसी का वीडियो देखते हो? Are you reading a recipe or you looking on YouTube? Or I mean, otherwise also, if you want to assemble something, something difficult, maybe you'll have to think about, like if you're working with youth, what are things that youth are building and how are they getting that information? I think that's the first sort of starting point. And then how many of them are really comfortable with the written word, whenever we work, I don't know who are the sort of people you're working with, what are their backgrounds, but whenever we work with semi-illiterate or, illiterate sort of, people, I mean, so when I say illiterate, it also comes across as, not very nice, but what I mean to say is, in terms of, they might be educated in different ways of, literacy, but not not the way that we look at literacy. And so then, people feel paper is very alien to them. Like even if it is, we have done this, we have drawn very nice visuals and we got very excited, "Humne itna acha banaya." But people don't even want to look at the piece of paper because it's a piece of paper that would involve reading, right? And if you're more used to oral, sort of communication, verbal communication, then you don't want to look at written communication. And then we realized if you show them something, that's it. That's the best sort of teaching. So I think these are the sort of difficult questions I'm putting there for you first. But let's come on to the building manual as well. So there, I think again, in terms of communication, pictures versus graphics, that's something we always think about in our team as well. So if you're saying now for social distancing strategies, if you saw niche humne strategies banaye the, we have made a picture of rope. Not made a picture, sorry, made a graphic of rope. But maybe we just put a picture of rope. That's easier for people to understand. So I think these things you can only decide based on sort of user feedback. And then after that, yeah, definitely then you break it down. You break it down to what is the most, easy to access. Like, from the market, if something is coming in 10 feet long sizes, right? Like the PVC pipe was 10 feet long, bamboo is 10 feet long. Then you don't want to say 2 feet 6 and, sort of like 3 feet 6. You basically want to say, okay, if you buy 10 feet, you cut it into these parts, right? So you want to think about that sort of, ease of, if you were going to the market and you had no idea how to build things, how would you do it? So I guess these are a few sort of suggestions. Yeah. Was that
I want to ask, so one thing we have been missing in our studio because of this pandemic is interaction with people. Though we did interact with the NGO people, but I want to know from your side, how does interaction with people evolve your design?
Right. So everything I just mentioned, and I think what I've really we've realized is the better ideas come from people. I mean, like, as an architect, it's very difficult to admit. We've actually gone into the field with recently before COVID, we went with 3 models, like physical models, of the basically based on the slope. We're not really thinking of. I mean, it's like form follows function, right? So it's like कहाँ पे पानी गिरेगा कि आपके आपके आपकी तरफ गिरेगा या आपकी तरफ गिरेगा, right? So you go with different sort of forms of roof, and then people came up with a 4th option. We went with 3, which realized is so much better, like from an architecture point of view also. So I would just say go with options always, and go with open-ended solutions and an open mind. And then, you'll always come with a better sort of an option or a validation of what you're already thinking. And, working with people is so good because it takes the pressure off you. You're not really worried about, oh, is it going to work or is it not? Because you've already got validation. Ki, yeah, it is working for them, right? If you go as an architect, then बहुत tension होता है ना jury के दिन पे भी कि ये काम करेगा या नहीं. But when you actually have, figured it out with people, then you're confident that this will work. So I think that is what I would say. But now because of COVID times, I'll tell you, we're also working on a few public projects. So like in Andhra Pradesh, there's a government project that we're working on, which is upgradation of government schools, building Anganwadis there as well. And wahan pe now they've kind of signed off, the municipality, the SPV, they've signed off कि हम तो community engagement करेंगे, stakeholder participation करना है. And now they can't because of COVID. So they've come up with a hybrid way, which I really like. It's an offline-online combination. There are community sort of leaders wahan pe, and youth, who are like leaders. And so they get people in a community hall. So let's say there are 10 people sitting where easily 40, 50 can sit. So you're observing physical distancing, everyone's wearing masks. And then they are connected digitally to the designer team, because the designer team cannot travel, to be on ground, but people who are within the neighborhood can mobilize themselves. So there is a offline sort of a, group connected online. So I think these sort of hybrids are possible. You should think about, but you always need a facilitator. So if the NGO is a facilitator, they can maybe get people connected to you this way.
Thank you.
Thanks. Did I confuse anyone? I think I also raised too many questions maybe. So if you're feeling like confused, or if you are in some sort of a moral dilemma, that's also okay to talk about.
I think Bhavika, you have something?
Yeah, like I have a question which is not related to the project, but it's related to your practice. It's like how squatting is been working in Delhi, and what do you think about how it should be formalized? Because I read about the case of Delhi Mohalla, like Mohalla Clinic, where Arvind Kejriwal has made these mohalla clinics, and they are informal basically. They are on the footpath. They are made on footpath or under the overbridge, things, at places like that. So and there are informal settlements which are removed. So what should be done? Because government is also like making like illegal construction on the road. Then like what should be the scenario of this? Should the informal or illegal settlements removed, or they should be having in situ like in situ development or redevelopment where they shift the people from the site?
Right. And so when you say government is building illegal structures, you mean the mohalla clinics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because BJP, I heard about, like in Gautam Khan's one article where he's talking about how the squatting is being there, and he's actually talking about how the cities now should be looked at. So he's producing these 3 points, which are squatting, repair, and contestation, which should be relooked upon, because now we have built a lot. Now we do not want to build more. So these are the things we should be looking at rather than making more greenfield sites into brownfield.
Yeah, I think this is a good discussion to have if this is also sort of within the domain of your studio. And definitely if you're thinking about these things, and I think that's exactly what Kriti also, tried to do, right? To get architecture students to think about these sort of bigger issues. So I guess there are 2, 3 ways of looking at it. Let's also look at what we mean by legal and illegal, right? So when 70% of the city, Delhi, is built informally, right? Out of which 30% are called jhuggi jhopris. So what are called slums, then maybe there's something wrong with what we call legal illegal, right? Like if such a large part of a city is considered illegal, then maybe we need to revise our definitions, so because it's not working for people. And another way to look at it also is, why are informal settlements there, right? So usually they're looked at as a problem. I mean, look at the railway land, the Supreme Court order that has just come out, which is talking about the eviction of 48,000 jhuggies in Delhi now, whatever's falling on railway land. And so the whole order was about cleaning garbage along the tracks. But it has been interpreted to remove bastis. So like the bastis are being seen as garbage, really. And I think that's deeply problematic. So why are informal settlements there? Because when Baksha, if you go to one of
हाँ वही नीचे जाके कॉपी वही दे
Akash Jain, hello, welcome
एक
to
ही
the
लीटर चाहिए ना बस
He's arranging for coffee for you. Okay, great. He's on mute. So what I was saying is, so when you go to Mumbai, let's say for your internship, or you go to Delhi, you will get housing that you can afford, hopefully. Mumbai is very expensive, but for many people who are migrating from villages or towns, they're not able to find affordable housing. नहीं मिलता है, बिल्कुल मिलता ही नहीं है. But work opportunity है, livelihood है. So what do? They create their own solution because the government is not creating it, right? So really, is it a problem or a solution? सरकार ने अफोर्डेबल हाउसिंग नहीं बनाई तो लोगों ने खुद बना ली. So I really see this as a sort of a self-created solution which needs to be supported. But at the same time, you don't want to live in that situation, right? जहाँ पे आपके पास sanitation, hygiene, access to water, access to educational sort of facilities when very close to where the younger kids are. These things are not there, and they're also at risk because many times they're along drains, along railway tracks. No one really wants to live like that, right? So how do you improve that situation? How can you support people in this sort of self-created solution? Or maybe sometimes they also need to be rehabilitated, resettled, because where they are, even though it's very close to their livelihoods, they are at a risk, environmental risk, to the environment, or they themselves are at a risk because of if you're next to a landfill. Recently the garbage landfill in Balaswad, it sort of collapsed, and काफी झुग्गीज भी उसमें ढह गई. So then you are at a risk to your own life. So in those cases you need to be resettled, but on humanitarian grounds, not because you're at risk to someone else, but also to, fine, those things can also be considered, but also because your own life is at a risk. And we have laws and policies to protect people. We need to leverage them. But often, there are these sort of orders that just came out. And that's also because of public perception, I feel. It's the language. It's the language of how we talk about informal settlements, the language of our judiciary as well. The way we talk about informal settlements, there was a case in 2000 which talks about them, maybe you read in Gotham's paper, which talks about them as encroachers, right? So unless we change this perception, this language, nothing really will change. Because in terms of policies, I think India has similar policies to whatever's happening across the world. But the way we are indifferent, the way we are indifferent to people from lower income sort of, backgrounds, to caste, so-called lower caste or backward caste. That sort of apathy, that sort of indifference, I think is not there in most countries. I could be wrong, but I think that's where we are really sort of making a mistake. That's really the problem, I feel. Anyways, without going on and on, to answer your question, yeah, so if mohalla clinics are there on these pieces of land and they're considered illegal, first of all, I don't think they're considered illegal because, if it is government land, they would have definitely got permission to put them there. But I think the question you're trying to ask is, why have they been allowed to encroach? And why are people not allowed to encroach? When you look at the floodplains of Yamuna, Akshardham has been allowed to be built, metro, and then the bus depot, all these things, the World Culture Festival was allowed to come up. But people who are farming and people are living in the most sustainable way, because they're building in bamboo and wood and just using tree branches to build their own homes, they are being removed because they are called encroachers. So then there is something really wrong with our priorities. And I think those are the sort of bigger questions. There's no one answer here. It's quite complex. And government is also not a monolith. We tend to think of government ki sarkar ne aisa kiya hai. But sarkar is so many different agencies, right? So kabhi MCD kuch bana dega, DD aake usko tod dega, right? And you're like, what is happening? But how do you engage with that is something you need to figure out. Where do you fit in? Either you fit in the government processes, or you do your own sort of work on ground, bottom up as we call it, or you can do both, which is what we are trying to do right now.
Yeah, like I asked them why then geo towers on the footpath. They are also there. So they were like, they pay us. When I asked, there's geo tower just outside my house, which is on the footpath. I asked them because they pay for us. Like private companies pay government for the infrastructure to be laid on the public land. Also, the major question that I wanted to ask about our site. Our site is also like the people we are designing for were also removed out of Sabarmati, where the riverfront development came, the one which is happening in Yamuna right now. And the site is very close to Pirana, which is the biggest landfill site in Ahmedabad. It's like very close to that. Also, we have many more scenarios which is just outside. There is a Torrent, which is an electric company, which provides electricity in Ahmedabad. They also have been set up. We have industries which are set up, but we haven't been to site. There's 2 people that have been to site, like Shruti Akash and Jiva went, and we haven't seen the site, but we have seen the photographs. So we are looking at from the photographs. So we come with there's water lodging issues that be happening, and we list down what are the issues that the people are facing, and then we are designing through that. So can you tell us, other than photographs, what we can do while designing and choosing materials for them?
Yeah, I think video calls right now is the only option. Like I was telling one of you as Anushka as well, I think, or after her. But I was talking about this sort of hybrid of offline, online. But I also want to say, I feel like maybe I've sort of, I hope I haven't demoralized you guys, because, it's very complex and it's very, very big. And I think that's why you have teachers, Ramya and Kriti and sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name with Ramya, but I will.
Harshil.
Okay, because they are buffering you from the reality, right? So they are the ones who can figure out that these are the larger processes, but they will give you studio bite problems, right? Like in the size of a studio that you can handle. Otherwise, you guys will not be able to handle this, right? And also happens often, like I also teach this course, the master's course of social design in Ambedkar University. And many of my students, they get so paralyzed with, oh, are we doing the right thing or the wrong thing? That, they end up thinking, hame to kuch nahi karna chahiye, because who are we to do anything, right? And so there, I just want to say that there is a huge merit. I mean, there's such a lot of importance of doing at least anything. Of course, as long as you're sensitive, about what you're doing and not really ending up creating more problems, but always just take the first step, just do something, and it's okay to learn by doing, and it will lead to something better. So you might not have all the answers now, you might not even understand the whole problem, the enormity of the problem, which is okay, but you have made some sort of a first foray into it, and you'll figure it out. Matlab 10-20 saal mein to samajh jaoge. So I think that was answering a question at a much bigger level. But I think at a specific level, we've already discussed, like, abhi to COVID hai, studio abhi 1-2 mahina hi bacha hai, focus on your online discussions, whatever feedback, but always think about what you want to ask people, because they're going to like everything you show them. So, okay, just maybe make a table. Okay, these are the 10 needs that I was trying to address. And then ask your questions against these needs. Did this get met? Did this get met? Did this get met? And then maybe, did I miss out anything? Things like that. So try to come up with those sort of frameworks.
Thank you.
Preeti, do you want to add something? Do you want to sort of navigate this conversation any certain direction?
No. I think this is good. I'm glad that these conversations are happening, and I'm happy they're asking these things.
Great. And also you can ask questions of my team if you want, because Nishta was on ground. I am in Jaipur, so I have not been on ground for this recent project that I was sharing. Nishta has been on ground, and also Anchal has been working with us. If you want, if you feel you'll get more detailed responses.
Okay. Dhyan is asking what can be the thought process while designing the cluster or the group of transit shelter, and what role does this group plays in the making of the overall transit plan, and how does this affect people? Dhyan, do you want? Okay, sorry. No,
No,
go
go
on.
ahead.
No, I was wondering if he wants you to answer all of this, but anyway, I feel like this is a massive question, but go on.
Yeah, okay, it's one question I feel. I want to understand. So you're talking to people who have already been relocated, right? So this is something it's a hypothetical situation based on the experience that they've had, right? What happened in the past, you know? Okay, so then maybe if it happens to someone else, then they can sort of inform that process, right? That's the whole sort of maybe how you're presenting it to people. If you're asking you this based on your experience, so that others, it can be easier for others when they go through this process. Or maybe you can just say, yeah, we are doing a studio to inform ourselves really, and your feedback would be useful for that. Because maybe aage jaake we want to become these designers who can actually do something useful. So I think it's very, very important to understand, I think, wo bolte hain na social fabric, how are people getting together? And it's really very, very different from place to place, culture to culture, based on so many factors, look at also like in terms of gender based spaces, they could be different. Religious factors, decide, different sort of things. Of course, we have so many regional sort of, differences as well. So for instance, I'll give you an example in Mansarovar Park, which is now a basti, where we were building an Anganwadi, but now it's at a threat of eviction because of the railway land court order. We realized that 4 or 5 families often have a shared cooking space, right? And also the way in winters, they put blankets around it. It's really nice to see. It becomes a very nice sort of a get together. And so every 4 or 5 houses, you can find these sort of nodes. So that means the chula is being shared. And why is it being shared? Because maybe it's a joint family, right? So किसी की शादी होगी, लड़के की शादी होगी, तो बहू और लड़का एक और उन्होंने घर बना लिया अपने लिए. So I think I always find it very helpful to think about clusters in terms of chulhas. How people cook really decides, how they come together. I mean, look at how you eat in your own house. Do you eat with your family on the dining table? Do you eat with your family, or, I mean, whatever, on the floor or whatever? Or do you eat in your own room watching TV, watching like a movie? Are your mom and dad eating together? Is everyone eating separately? I think that says a lot about your family relation, right? It's the same. Like, how are people cooking together? How are they eating together? And so in same area, Mansarovar Park, I also found like a mobile chula, so it's basically tasla, no? tasla जिसमें वो सीमेंट वगैरह लेकर आते हैं, उसमें they have made a chulha, मतलब मिट्टी का चूल्हा उसमें. It was amazing. And I'm like, see, these are like the best sort of designs. So they can carry it anywhere, right? And I haven't really looked into it in detail, but I don't know if they're sharing it between houses. कि अब तुम्हारे घर में तुम्हारे, या फिर maybe they don't have a lot of space. So maybe they're like, अच्छा जब cook कर, it's a multifunctional space. कि अभी यहाँ पे मैं धो रही हूँ, अब मैं यहाँ cook कर रही हूँ. Things like that. So I think these are things which require a lot more understanding. And I think if you focus on these sort of things, how do people come together? Where do they hang out? How do they hang out? What is their group sort of like? How big is that group? How do they cook together? Definitely. How do they eat together? Then I think you start getting an idea of these clusters. And so maybe some people like, of course, if you're designing in London, it would be so different from what you're, when you're designing here. Maybe everyone wants privacy. Of course, based on economic sort of backgrounds also, people in richer colonies don't talk to each other. We have like high gates, high walls. So, and then maybe, if you're more like socially cohesive when you are, living in a informal settlement, sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes because you're all so close together, you have to, get along well. I think these are the things to understand perhaps for clustering.
So I have one question. I mean, not a question, but it wasn't part of your presentation, but I think since the entire transit kid group is dealing with setting up of shelters that are supposed to be temporary. I know that your mod school also, I remember in the previous presentation that you did for the other workshop, where you had mentioned that you were able to disassemble it and you were able to move it. So I was curious to understand, how did you all work out the foundation? Because I think that knowledge would be very helpful to this set of students who are dealing with that right now, because even they have very less contact to the ground sort of a structure.
Yeah. Yeah, and also there I was thinking, Kriti, I think it's definitely nice if people are thinking about design of their own transit shelters. Like I wish they had done it in Katputli, because finally like the boxes they were put in, they're not happy with that at all. And but then how much of it is something they can build on their own is also something to think about. So maybe some of them want to take that initiative. Maybe the incentive for people to build on their own, but maybe sometimes things should be also built for them. Because I just feel like relocation is such a forced process usually. So we have to also think about how much people should do, considering we're already making them do so much. So I think maybe these are also things to think about. In the school, definitely everyone came together because it was like a community effort. Okay, we want to do this for our children, we want to do this for building a school, a better school in our space. And there I think it all depends on I think for the sort of like land tenure, so from how formal or informal the space is. So for instance, the Anganwadi that we were going to build, actually there also we are able to put foundations. Okay, so there are two scenarios where we are able to put a foundation, where we are not able to put a foundation. Where you're not able to put a foundation, we were also thinking about like a doll house, right? Like a self-supporting weight. This is when we were thinking of some classrooms for COVID. Some schools are thinking of building extra classrooms. We were also thinking our structures can be used by schools, but there, let's say in a football field or a basketball field, but there you can't put a foundation in the basketball field. So then you have to like either have a very firm ground, or you need to have, let's say, a cement coat, right? A concrete coat. So there, we were thinking of slotted angles, just almariya banti hai, office ki almariya, the old style, and then that could just have a frame like a dollhouse, and kind of just sit on it, right? As long as it doesn't sort of get unsettled. But in all the other places, the Anganwadi that we've been building, we have somehow managed to have a foundation, even though it's not allowed. But foundation pe aisa hai ki us pe just like these parts are coming out, these metal parts, and then you can sort of bolt the whole structure, and then you can unbolt it and remove the whole structure. So what remains on the ground is just the foundation. So let's say 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, very tiny sort of boxes of concrete. And then also I've come across work of other people like Hatch Workshop, right? They've also worked with SEPT in the past. I mean, I think she was a master's student. Helen, she was a master's student at SEPT, and they've designed like housing for construction workers, I think in Ahmedabad. In which they had something called also moving the foundation because it's in a bucket.
Sorry.
Did you lose me?
Yeah, we kind of lost you.
Did you hear me? Yeah.
No, we lost you.
Did you hear about the bucket foundation?
No.
Okay, I was talking about Helen. I think she has done her master's from SEPT. From the Hatch, she started something called the Hatch Workshop. So they built some housing for construction workers in Ahmedabad. No? Okay.
Can you hear us? Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I can hear you. I'm just going to shift to my data. Are you sure it's not breaking?
It's
okay,
better
I'm just
now.
going to shift to my data. 1 second. Okay, is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, because my my mother is also she does online classes as well. She's an educationist. So I think we're competing with the broadband. Yeah. Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on my data now. What I was saying is there is this master's student. I mean, she was a master's student at SEPT called Helen. She started something called the Hatch Workshop. and they did construction worker housing in Ahmedabad. I don't know if you've heard of that project. So in that, they came up with something called the bucket foundation, in which, so you can move the whole structure, but you can also move the foundation because it's been cast in a bucket. So you can just, sort of lift it because it's only as big as a bucket and as heavy as concrete in a bucket would be. And I thought that was pretty cool. I think they had issues with the thoda sa usme, I think the sort of oil, which needs to be put in the bucket so that you can take the foundation out was a problem. So the bucket just gets attached to the foundation, things like that. So I think when they also prototype, they realize, some pros and cons. But I think these are things to think about. But some concrete in the ground, if it's just at every column, I think it's fine as long as it's not the entire field.
Thank you. Anybody else would have any? We can maybe take one last question.
Yeah, I'm also very tired of hearing myself speak.
Okay. I guess not. I think you're done.
Okay, great. I really enjoyed listening from you guys, because otherwise it's just one-way dissemination. So I think I got a good idea of the fact that you guys have a good idea of what you're doing and some things you're figuring out. So thank you for sharing your sort of inputs as well, and good luck. Good luck for your studio. And I think Kriti is doing a great job. So I look forward to how this develops over the next semesters as well, with other student batches as well. And we are called Social Design Collaborative. I put the logo in the end. So look us up. If you have any questions, feel free to approach me. Just say I'm from Kriti Studio and you get a straight pass to any sort of answers you might be looking for. So good luck.
Thank you so much, Swati.
What comes out. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for taking the time out, for being so patient, answering all the questions, sharing all of your processes, and being so upfront about it. I think we truly appreciate it, and I'm hoping that all of this will, only push them to question their projects, to make their projects better, and that's all we hope for.
Yeah. Thank you. Good luck. And nice to meet you, Ramya and Harshit. I feel like, Ramya, I've seen you before, but we'll figure it out later. We have met, no?
We've spoken. I've spoken to you over phone.
Okay. Yeah, I did something. Okay. Yeah. Have a great day.
Take care, Swati.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.